Well, thank you and good afternoon. As a warning, the introduction to this presentation is the most complicated bit. After that, it gets easier. Bear with me. The simple thing, the easy thing, my name is Dunstan Arthur. I'm a business psychologist, practice director. Slightly more complicated is the organization I work for. When I joined, it was this company, SHL, well known in the testing business. We changed, we evolved, new logo, fine. We then got bought by a company called CEB, became CEB, SHL Talent Measurement. That then got absorbed, it became CEB. That was fine. CEB then got bought by Gartner. This year, Gartner then sold us on. We're now back to being an independent company, an independent assessment company, and we're back to being SHL again. And it's a long-winded way, but this one's a keeper. We're going to stick with this for a little while because it's getting confusing at the start of things. But we're business psychologists, we're an assessment firm. We deal with all manner of testing, assessment, talent management. That's one part of it. The other part of it is I'm here today to tell a story, and a story of a selection process, how that was reviewed, how that was revised, how that was refreshed. And we were due to be doing that with the organization in question. The organization in question couldn't make it, and I'm presenting the story for them, which is fine. However, the organization, I'm afraid, has to remain secret. And the reason for that is partly because if they're not there in person, they're not really very comfortable with people talking about it. They'd rather be there. The other reason is that the organization themselves are actually secret. It's a different kind of organization. It's one we've done quite a bit of work with. It's an organization that provides technical services, specialist services, scientific services within the defense sector, so they contract to the MOD and different types of people. So by nature, they are quite a secretive organization. Hence, I'm here talking, but they'll have to remain anonymous, but if people have questions, by all means, ask me over lunch. But they're a good organization. They really do absolutely stand out in the field in terms of the technical services, the different things that they provide. And they recruit a lot of different people. They recruit a lot of scientists, a lot of engineers, a lot of very technical people, but they also recruit a lot of ordinary organizational roles as well. And one of the things they've done successfully for many years is to recruit early careers, apprentices, graduates, bringing new talent into the organization. And that one has always worked pretty well. It's quite an established program. They build up a lot of expertise. They build up great relationships. Within a niche sector, they build up a good brand around it. But they came to the realization that that wasn't working quite as well as it could be. There were further challenges ahead. There were further things that they wanted to do. And one of the key things they wanted to do was to try and expand out a little bit from the traditional people that they recruited from. So how can they get out? How can they look at the new talent that's out there? And they recruited very well in word of mouth, but it tended to be quite a narrow geographical pool, a narrow group of people, which was great. They got good people from it, but there was a sense that there was more talent out there. So it's about bringing in new talent, it's bringing in new people, new ideas, new ways of thinking, and expanding it out a little bit. But at the same time, it's about maintaining diversity, maintaining inclusion. And again, they had a good track record on this. There wasn't a problem here that needed fixing. They had a very good record in bringing in different people, different backgrounds, even as far as things like neurodiversity and people with different ways of thinking. Quite advanced in that one. But whatever they did, they had to maintain that good record. What they also had to do was keep the quality of hire going. And again, they'd done this well. It wasn't that the people they brought in were bad, but they wanted the process to be better and to get more better people in. And it's partly about identifying the right people. Who are the people that are going to fit? Not only as an apprentice, but also to go forward. Also to have that potential to progress within the organization. And one of the things that we're looking at is something that's been touched on in different parts of today, was to really find a way to get people who bought into the organization and what it was doing. And we talked about it. I mean, Neil talked about this, about the importance of job descriptions being confusing. We've talked about the importance of representing the organization and its mission. And that was very much the case here. So how can we get people that really understand what they're getting themselves into, both in terms of the role, but also in terms of the organization in itself? And bear in mind the sector that was in, was within defense. We accept it's not perhaps for everybody, but they're doing a lot of good stuff. And if they can showcase that, they can get the right people that fit. And they wanted that to be serious. They wanted people to commit to it. And not sign up for the first apprentice scheme that they've seen, but really get to know the organisation, buy into it, and then make that proper career choice. And then just to say, no challenges here, but they wanted to have their cake and eat it. They then wanted to make everything more efficient and more effective at the same time as well. So it's about reducing the cost, direct costs, indirect costs. One of the things that they had was that they recruited a lot internally from their own internal recruitment team, but they also had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. They would fall back on agencies, they would fall back on other methods as well. So they were a little bit reactive in that, but it increased the spend. They were also spending too much time on their own candidates, not maximising the time the recruiters were spent interviewing the best people. So they were looking at ways in which they could make that more efficient. And again, some of the fields that they were looking in, they're looking to expand the number of candidates, but every candidate was fairly precious in some of these areas, so how can we reduce the numbers of them dropping out? So they were looking for quite a few different things here. And the story is really how they went about doing that. And it does tap into a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of what the candidates are looking for, in terms of the recruitment branding, in terms of the process and how we can make that easy. So it fits nicely within a big theme that we're talking about today. The first one was about how they reached out, how they got more candidates, how they expanded that pool. And as I say, previously they worked in a relatively small geographic area, well known within it, not so well outside. So they said, how can we start to expand beyond that? Now, before they could do that, there was another challenge because their brand, good as it was fairly specialist. It was also a little bit staid, a little bit stuffy, if I can say that. Not quite edgy, not quite cool, not quite fun in the way that other tech organizations would be. And because there was a little bit of mystique about what they actually do, it's very hard to appeal to people. So they're trying to portray themselves as being an interesting career choice, but actually it was tricky with the tools that they had to really portray that because they were a little bit hidden and it was seen as being a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit government, a little bit of a stuffy place to work. So there was a difficult challenge there. And the other aspect of it was that the experience for a candidate for the selection process by their own admission was a little bit tortuous as well. A lot of different stages, a lot of different application forms, security clearance, which is a natural thing that has to happen, but the whole process was quite lengthy and quite turgid for people, and they lost people along the way. So yes, there was absolutely that desire to go out and reach out to new people, but actually there's some challenges in order to accomplish that. And rather than tinkering around the edges, they adopted the technique and said, let's absolutely take this and start afresh. Let's really do this in a big way. And they sat down and worked out the whole new recruitment brand. And again, there are other people in the room who can advise on recruitment brands far better than I can. But what they did was they took the good things about what they did. And these guys work with some cool science. They have lasers and everything. It's good stuff that they do, cutting edge projects. So they said, how can we maintain that and that interest, that technical side of things, but how can we make it more interesting? How can we make the brand more personal? And one of the big things that they did was absolutely they made it all about people. So if you look at the website now, it's people, it's their stories. We've got blogs on there from people, we've got pictures of people, we've got videos. So it's all about the people doing the work. Less about the technical side of things, less about the process. That's in there because it's interesting, but it's much more about the people side of things. And this allowed them to go out and start reaching out to more people. Partly online, that was absolutely looking at different ways of channeling different applicants to it, but they also took it out to the public as well in careers fairs and took it out to different geographies. But that was accompanied by the new brand and a new way of getting people in there. And that taps through to things like the website. And again, it's a different way of engaging with their candidates. How can they get people interested and bought into that mission, not just in the organization itself? And one of the key aspects that they were looking for was to make the process not only innovative, but interactive. And this is one of the lessons that was coming out of the work they did in looking at the millennial candidates, which the apprentices predominantly were. How can we make it more interesting for them? And the interaction was part of it. So don't just go in there and be a passive consumer of the website content. Yes, you can look at videos, listen and things like that, but it's a chance to join in different ways. And that, again, came through from the website. It came through the whole rest of the selection process, as I'll go through. So it's about engaging with people in a whole different way. So a whole review. How can they look at things differently? How can they reinvent themselves? And how can they build on that? Another thing they did was a little bit more internal, but they changed the mindset of the recruitment team. And what they did was they said, we are currently working in recruitment. From now on, we are changing our name and we're going to be called talent advisors. And you may laugh and say, right, that's just a change of name. This is just a different buzzword. But the name talent advisor for them represented a whole different way of thinking. And it was a way of getting away from the more reactive service-led, the organization wants these people, we'll go and find them, and turned it round into something that was much more of an advisor to the business. So that rather than waiting on people ordering candidates or giving their requirements, the recruitment team was in a position to be able to advise. So rather than saying, yes, we'll go and find it, here, let me tell you what these candidates are looking for, let me tell you where they are, let me tell you how we can get them, let me tell you how we can approach them, and let me tell you how you can engage them. They were taking the initiative and being much more proactive, and that really helped in terms of bringing a lot more of the business back in-house and taking it away from some of the external agencies. That's an easy thing to do because it's very easy for me to stand up here and say, everybody in the team, go and become a strategic advisor. It doesn't happen overnight. But what they did was they put in place, alongside the mindset change, a series of trainings, a series of workshops to encourage people to have the right skills around it. So the right skills in terms of understanding their function and what they needed to do, understanding the business and some of the technical specialisms, and also being able to advise the business, be able to influence, be able to use data and insights in order to put the right case forward. And this happened behind the scenes, and it was one of the less visible parts of it, but actually it was one of the bits that really allowed the other stages to take place, really allowed them to take the initiative and start putting changes in place. So having this drove the efficiency, it drove different ways of working that again allowed them to be different, to be reinvented. What they also did, and the bit that we got involved in, this is our small part in the story, was they looked at the selection process itself. And parts of it were working fine. They had assessment days, they had interviews, but they looked in particular at the early stages. How can we sift candidates? How can we screen candidates? How can we identify the right candidates? And they put quite an emphasis on the assessment. And we design assessments, this is what we do, this is fine. But they put quite a few different demands, because if you think the whole process was there in order to make it more interesting, to make it more engaging, to make it more positive for a millennial candidate group, that was one thing. They wanted it to maintain that diversity, and if possible, improve the diversity. That's another thing. They wanted it to be something that would maintain the quality of candidates and not get a drop in the quality of hire. That's another thing as well. So there were quite a few demands on the assessment process. The process that we helped them to put in place managed to do all of those things. So we made sure that it's accessible. And accessible, we heard this today from Neil, accessible for a millennial candidate group pretty much means mobile. But it's not just about putting something on a mobile, it's got to be intuitive, it's got to make sense for somebody who's grown up working their way around a mobile. It's also got to be easy to understand in terms of a process. And we have to accept that if you're an apprentice in early careers, you may not have worked before, you may not have done a lot of formal job applications before. Me, in my life, I think I spent the first half of my life doing exams at school. I spent the second half of my life doing psychometrics as a career. I've done a lot of tests. I kind of get it. But I accept that not every candidate is that way. So what we had to do for this group was to really make it obvious what they needed to do, so that without having to fall back on asking people or phone up the company, they could navigate their way through the process. The other thing we needed to do was to make it attractive. And when I say attractive, I don't just mean it looked nice, that's part of it, but it has to blend in with the rest of the attraction strategy. So if you think one of the things we're doing is showcasing people in the role, showcasing apprentices and how they progressed in their career, we wanted to carry that through on the assessment platform as well, so that people got to feel that this was all part of a seamless process. So it was attractive in the sense that it looked nice, attractive in the same way it's helping to attract candidates in. And the assessment as well, we wanted to build in the interactive element, because this was an important thing for the organization. Going back again, if job descriptions are confusing, people don't really understand them, the best way of getting somebody to understand a role is really to get them to experience a little bit of it. give them a chance to try it out in the safety of the application process, and you allow people to experience it and make a decision based on it. So we built in things like realistic job previews. People could go in, have a look at different scenarios they may face, get a chance to answer questions on it, and get instant feedback. And that was particularly important, partly because the jobs themselves are, as I say, slightly specialist, slightly obscure, but people didn't really understand some of them. Partly because the working environment, by the nature of the organization, had some constraints on it. There are things you can do and can't do in an MOD, Ministry of Defence clearance company. And we wanted to make sure that people were comfortable with all of that. And let's tell them up front, let's give them some feedback on that and let them experience it. So we used realistic job previews. We also used a situational judgment test. Everyone's familiar with these. This is one where you get a scenario and a series of options, and you have to choose what option you would take. So your manager asks you to do this on a Friday afternoon. Do you A, go home, B, do what they say, C, whatever. This works for this environment because it doesn't require any job experience, doesn't require people to have a lot of background in a workplace, and it's also quite friendly. People can again experience different things. And all of that meant we had something that was supporting the diversity, it was supporting the inclusion. There were no barriers in there. It wasn't a difficult thing for people to do. Furthermore, and this is something that Mark was hinting at as well, by the use of images, by the use of the branding within the site, we could portray different people, we could portray the backgrounds of different people that are already working there, and it just creates the expectation that this is a fair organisation, that this is a fair workplace. So the diversity works on, yes, we've got a test that is fair for people, but it also works in terms of creating the environment where you expect this to be a fair organisation. So there's a lot goes into the assessment, but it worked out quite nicely. This is just a diagram of how it works. It's a platform we call Precise Fit, but simple things in it. The first stage is a guide that all it does is say, this is the process you're going to do, this is each stage, and this is how long it's going to take. And that sounds laughably simple, but we've done research on this, and it's one of the main drivers of a good candidate experience. Don't leave them hanging wondering what the next stage is. Don't leave them hanging thinking what they're going to do next. Tell them up front, you're going to spend 4 minutes on that, 6 minutes on that, and 8 minutes on that, and then people can plan their own time around it. Give them a chance to see it, look at the pictures, answer questions about it, give them feedback. And the feedback is very simple. For an old school psychologist like me, it's odd, but the feedback is in the form of things like smiley faces. And it's a happy smiley face saying, yes, you fit us in this respect. It's a frowny face that says, no, you don't quite fit. But it matches the expectations of the group and it makes it accessible. And part of the concept is that we take candidates on a journey. We're just talking about this on the table. If you can get people to follow you on the journey, by the time they reach the assessment, it means they've already bought into what they have to do. It means they've already had a chance to experience it. They've already had some feedback that's quite positive, otherwise they wouldn't be there. So by the time it comes to the assessment, that's not a barrier because they're already bought into what you're going to do. So the whole assessment process is almost a miniature version of the whole selection process in terms of that interaction, in terms of that giving people feedback, giving them something back, but allowing them to experience it. So how did it work? We like to judge any selection process, any assessment process, not by what the organisation puts into it, but by the outcomes that you get out of it. You'll hear us talking about outcomes-based assessment as a thing, but it's about what you can achieve as an organisation from doing it. And the outcomes are all very positive. Some of these are still being collated, and we will publish these in due time, but it worked. In terms of attracting more people, yes, they got candidates from a much wider area and from different backgrounds as well. The candidate feedback was positive. And as the organisation said, they knew they'd cracked it when they went to a careers fair and an apprentice candidate came up to them unprompted and said, I know you, yours was the best application process I've done. That was the only one that really gave me a chance to really find out what it was like to work there. And that was just priceless because that is exactly what they were looking to achieve. But candidates were mirroring it, candidates reflecting it, candidates were appreciating it. The good thing about the diversity, we've run stats on this and we've run the data in terms of the assessments, no adverse impact against any groups, which is good. We even looked at this on age. We had a vast number of candidates. For apprentices as well, we had a certain number that were over 40 as well, which is quite encouraging. Didn't even see too much of a difference on the age. And particularly with where they want to go in terms of attracting different types of candidates for engineering, technical roles. Not only was there no disadvantage against the female candidates, the females actually did slightly better. So not significantly better enough to cause a concern, but the fact that they're performing slightly better just is a really nice message for that even playing field. So in terms of achieving what they wanted, going out to wider people, yes, that worked. Did it work in terms of getting the quality of hire? Yes, it did. And again, that idea of giving people a preview and allowing them to make serious decisions, that really worked. We worked out things like the fairness of the assessments, but also the validity of the assessments and how they're predicting, and again, that side works. And one thing they noticed was this was coming through fairly early on in terms of the quality of the candidates coming through to interview. And that idea of maximizing the recruiter's time, they weren't spending as much time recruiting people who either didn't understand the role or just weren't a fit or just didn't really get what they were supposed to do. So the quality of candidates coming through was a key measure there. And in terms of the efficiency, this was a good finding as well, because all the work that they did, let's be honest, required a certain level of investment of new websites, new brand, new assessments, new selection processes, training, taking people offline. The one thing that they found within the first year was that the whole process was cost neutral. So they invested a certain amount in order to achieve all of these different things. But irrespective of the quality outcomes, what they found is that they paid for themselves in the first year in terms of getting candidates on board quickly, but also reducing the agency spend, being able to manage things in-house. So a fantastic result in terms of doing this, but doing it in a way that the organization could sustain. So the outcomes are good. Now those have then spurred them on, and they're now looking at the different stages of what they can do. And I think one of the benefits of the whole process, from looking at the brand, looking at the way they interact with candidates, one of the good signs from that is that they're now about to roll it out across the different more higher volume roles within the organization. And that's real proof in the pudding that this works. They're also looking at doing things, I think, Mark, you mentioned that nobody likes their ATS. I'm sure that was you, but forgive me if not. They're reviewing their ATS. Everybody's reviewing their ATS at one point. They're looking at it, but what they're planning on doing is building out something that's much more hands-free, much more integrated. And the interesting thing there is that they're looking to automate the process from a candidate point of view, but not lose the interaction, not lose that ability to build relationships or give feedback to candidates. They're building in different aspects, not automating for the sake of it, but allowing that relationship to flourish, but in a more efficient way. On the back of this, they're now reviewing the subsequent stages, the assessment days, the interviews, and there's going to be further analysis where we start looking at the diversity in more detail across the different stages. And again, looking at all the different groups, including things like the neurodiversity that they're proud of. So there's a lot of good things still to happen on this. It's a good story. It illustrates a lot of the different things we talked about today. You know, the importance of knowing the candidates, knowing what the candidates are looking for, the importance of looking at the recruiter brand, the employer brand, looking at everything from the website all the way through to the candidate journey, the selection, and how we deal with them afterwards. So it's a fantastic illustration. I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of other people because it's a lot of stuff that's been mentioned already and may well be mentioned before. But it's a good illustration of all of that. But if I had to pull out some key takeaways, things that people could take and do action on, some relatively simple things. So the first one is that idea of enabling, empowering the recruitment team. Getting that mindset shift away from being reactive to the needs of the business to then advising the business, to using the data, using the insights, using that expertise to shape the direction of the organization and not the other way around. Other things, think about the candidate pool. And again, there's some fantastic research. All of the stuff that you've heard today, all the stuff from Reid and Neil, absolutely perfect in terms of the needs of the candidate pool. And when you put yourself in the candidate's shoes, particularly for things like the early careers, the millennials, the apprentices, understanding what they're looking for and what the key drivers are allows you to build a process around it. So start with the needs of the candidates, work backwards, don't start with the needs of yourself or the needs of your suppliers and work forwards. And the last lesson, again, an encouraging one, is the technology is there, but it's not just simply a question of bolting in new tech. So yes, this involved things like videos. Yes, this involved blogs. Yes, this involved new website. Yes, it involved new assessment tech. Yes, it may well involve new ATS. But none of those things happened in isolation. It was all part of a holistic process, all with the overall plan of improving not only the efficiency, but the experience of the candidates and the quality of hires coming out. So it's not just about bolting in a new piece of technology, it's about having that overall plan and then using that technology in service of that. It's our story, we wanted to share it. More details of this will come out as we go through, and hopefully the next time I'll be able to stand up and talk about it, I'll be joined by the client themselves. But if anybody does have any questions, by all means speak to myself and colleagues over lunch. I'm more than happy to talk about it. Thank you.